Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Lee Kemp. Right now I'm on the Worship Planning Daytime Committee. That's my most current role. My other roles you all know about. But anyway, I want to welcome you here this morning. For those of you who are here for the first time or haven't joined us in a while, here's our welcome packet. And there's one up here and there's some in the back. We encourage you to take one so you can find out more about us. Also, to further welcome you, we'd like you to stay after church for our coffee hour, hosted by Lee and Roger Kemp this morning. Just some cookies and real simple stuff, coffee, and enjoy talking with each other. It's right out here to your right and then into that green room, also on the right. So we hope you'll join us after church. I think that's everything on the script. I also want to draw your attention to some things in the bulletin. There's quite a bit going on. We have some book studies going on. And if you haven't joined one yet and there's a convenient time of any of these listed, please feel free to get a study book and join in with any of these groups. Also there's some save the dates information on here. The upcoming one is Tom Feast, Troy Area United Methodist. Troy Area United Ministries. And a lot of us are going, so if you'd like to go, it always is a fun night. They have a silent auction and things like that, so it's always a lot of fun. Good food, good fellowship. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is something new in the pews, which is a survey or an opinion poll on... We'd like your opinion on how the worship services are going. So we really appreciate it. We'd like feedback on how the worship teams are doing, and if there's anything that you feel went well or that you thought might need improvement, there is a sheet to fill out. We encourage you to fill that out. We really want your feedback. We want worship to be meaningful for everyone. And I think that's everything. Okay, good. And next, please, Curtis will grace us with the call to worship.
Good morning. I'm Curtis Dunnigan, and I would also like to welcome you to Christ Church. When my dear friend Lee Kemp asked me to speak about hospitality, I jumped at the opportunity. My wife and I served for many years in the hospitality industry in Orlando, Florida, so I am very familiar with this topic. Also, I don't know if you can tell or not, I'm a Southerner, so you know that Southern hospitality is right there. You have to understand one thing before coming to Christ Church. My wife would drag me to other churches, and needless to say, not with my full blessing, as a matter of fact, against my will. Until I found Christ Church, I had never experienced hospitality in a church from a congregation. I always found churches to be full of politics, cliques, and I did not think I had to go to church to be a good Christian. Christ Church is the only religious institution that I have found that opens their arms to all. And trust me, I have visited many churches. When my wife passed away in 2012, this congregation was there for me and still is here for me today. I cannot honestly say that about anyone else, and that is what I call northern hospitality. With my wife gone, this would have been the golden opportunity for me to sleep in on Sunday mornings. I am happy to say I found myself wanting to come to church and be with all of you. Just to give you a couple of examples of how the members of this church have provided hospitality. A few Sundays ago, a man down on his luck entered our sanctuary looking for help. Annie Borthwick made it her mission to collect funds to help the gentleman. Paul and Alice Morano took their time and drove him to the bus station in Albany. I know for a fact Paul had other plans on that Sunday afternoon, but he saw a need and prioritized. Bob Blackman reached out to all of us a couple of years ago to collect funds for a fellow church member so he could fly to Portland, Oregon to visit his ailing mother. That, my friends, is just a couple of examples of the hospitality shown by Christ Church. Christ Church also opened my eyes to a very important need, the homeless. Getting involved at Joseph's House and volunteering for In From the Cold brought another aspect to my life. There are opportunities to help, serve, which is rewarding and fulfilling to be able to provide food, conversation, and kindness to those that have had hard times. I attended the Joseph's House reception this past Thursday evening, and Annie was there too, and I am sure will back me up when I say the staff and fellow volunteers could not have been more sincere folks than what we experienced at that event. Now, I invite you to stand and sing He Has Made Me Glad. You can follow along on the screen or in the hymnal, page 2270. And let's make sure the Baptists up the road can hear us.
Education Sunday, so we wanted to hear from our wonderful Sunday school folks and hear about what they learned this year.
Well, we've been meeting together for a year, and over the year we've done quite a few things, and we decided to make a puzzle to show. So, will you just take turns?
So this is Bible stories. And this is pills and bottles, the thing that we did with the metal.
This is very appropriate one for Emily to pick because this is her brainchild. Scarves.
Yeah, woohoo!
Friendship. And then we did In From the Cold.
Canned goods.
Names and faces. Seth, Alex, Emily, and Grace.
Aww.
Worship and prayer. Hands were drawn by Wanda Dinah Johnson.
They really are magnificent. You have to take a look at them.
Amazing.
Joys and concerns. It's been a wonderful year.
It has been, and we're very grateful for the kids that come, and we're also very grateful to the adults that come. And Ken isn't here to hear our thanks, but I think he's at a graduation. So if you see him, thank him for his work in the Sunday school, and also thank Gail and Ron. Here you go.
Don't go away yet. We have some presents for you from the congregation. Wait, don't go away yet. kids, Alex and Seth, can you come over here, please? So just, I understand Gail is going to be moving to a new house, so maybe she can put those in her yard, so you can give that to Gail. And I think this will go the best with Ron and Nancy's house, don't you?
Yeah.
I think so. And this one is for Ken Rose, but he's not here, so we'll give it to him when he comes back. And then we have two who are leading classes just right now for this study series. So this would be for the Holcombs up at their house. And this will be for Janet Douglas, but I don't think she's here today. But we'll give that to her when she comes. So let's have all the congregation give God the praise for our wonderful teachers. So grateful for all your work and all your love and all your energy. And Seth, come straight back up here, and we're doing scripture next. You going to do it by yourself, or you can help?
Okay. Greatest in the kingdom. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Then he called a little child over to sit among the disciples and said, "I assure you that if you don't turn your lives around and become like this little child, you will definitely not enter the kingdom of heaven. Those who humble themselves like this little child will be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me."
So I don't know how many of you have ever been to San Francisco. Even before my son met our daughter-in-law, Rio, whose family lives near the corner of Haight and Ashbury. You might have heard of that in San Francisco. I had been there many times, and it's just, I could easily move there if I ever could afford it, which I won't be able to, so don't worry. But I love to wander around the Mission District, especially because it's really like going to Latin America. It's so fun, and I love Mexican and Central American foods, and you know, you'll walk down the street and there's all these little bodegas and there's little restaurants that say Restaurante Nicaragüense, you know, so you can find every different, it's really like taking a tour of Latin America. It's really, really fun. Anybody ever been in the Mission? Yeah, I know some of you have. But I've never been there at Christmas time, and that's something I'd love to do someday, because as you probably know, it's a tradition, especially in Mexico and Guatemala and some of the other Central American countries, that during Advent, the last 9 days, I guess it is, before Christmas, they have the ritual of Las Posadas. And this is from a little article by Ana Maria Pineda. At each night leading up to Christmas, they have processions throughout the mission, and if you go to any village in Mexico, it'll be the same way. As soon as the sun goes down, they'll have processions with lit candles and people in costume and carrying statues of Mary and Joseph, and they go to each door that's been picked ahead of time and bang on the door, and somebody playing Joseph will say, "En nombre del cielo, buenos moradores, dada unos viajeros posada esta noche." In the name of God, we ask those who dwell here, give to these travelers lodging this evening, and they're turned away 8 times. No, we can't let you in. You might be a thief. We don't know who you are. Goodbye. Wham! Door slams in their face. So the next night they go to a different house, and they finally, Noche Buena, on Christmas Eve, finally Joseph is exhausted, and he gives a longer little speech that the door comes open this time, and the innkeeper is like, "Well, I still don't have any room, but you can have this little room in my stable. And then, of course, they're enacting the whole Christmas story, but they're also enacting a part of their own story. Because there's so many folk in that neighborhood who were once refugees, who were emigres to this country, who have known times where they had doors slammed in their face. And they are reenacting that as a people of God. They are saying, we need to practice. We need to practice, as Curtis put it so beautifully, we need to practice that gift of hospitality, of opening the household of the heart, because they have all had those experiences when it wasn't so welcoming. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It says in the prologue to the Gospel of John, or another translation which I love, the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us. So you have the feeling of God always traveling with God's people, and the whole of the Bible really is a story of people on the move. So that would be a Christmas time celebration and practice of the church's values of welcoming the stranger. But you could even go further back into the Old Testament, and if you've ever been to a Passover celebration with some of our Jewish friends, it's also, of course, a celebration of the wandering in the wilderness and God's deliverance from the slaves in Egypt. And it starts out with that great line from Exodus, "A wandering Aramaean was my father." And people celebrate, our friends in the Jewish community celebrate Passover because they also were once strangers and slaves and sojourners. And they want to remember those who are now strangers and aliens and unwelcome. So it's something that the people of God have, in various parts of our histories, found it important to practice. We offer hospitality because we were once strangers, in our remembrance of our history as a people of God, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, throughout the whole Bible. The Bible can be read as a history of people who were strangers and then were welcomed. But maybe some of you have not had that experience. I remember going to a church, starting in that new appointment early in July, and meeting some little old lady and shaking her hand. "And how long have you been in this church?" And she said, 9 generations. So maybe that's you. Maybe you have a road named after you here, your family here in Troy, or maybe you're one of those old Troy families and you never really had to find a different home or different school or a new church. Maybe you haven't had that experience. I bet there are some people here for whom that whole experience of being a wanderer and an alien never have had a door slammed in your face. God bless you if this is you. And I wonder, maybe not everyone here has been a stranger, but I'm going to guess that 100% of everyone here was once a baby. There she is! Yes, sir, that's my baby. We are no grandparents. Our baby was born 12:30, early Wednesday morning in NYU Hospital. Her name is June. Didn't you like the way I snuck that right in? She started out in the NICU because she was having some respiratory issues. She was almost a month early, but she's 6 pounds, 7 ounces, plenty big. And she's going home this morning. So she doesn't even have that little oxygen on her anymore. So, yeah, you can take her off again. But I wanted to introduce you. If you don't find me around on a Sunday and a Monday, that's probably where I am. I probably ran down to Brooklyn to spend some time with her. So when the disciples, as Seth just read, when the disciples asked Jesus, in the 18th chapter of Matthew it's recorded, "Who is the greatest? Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" What did Jesus do? He called to himself a little child. And he said to them, and whenever, this is a little clue, whenever you see those words in this common English, it's "I assure you," and then RSV, it's truly, truly, I say to you. Whenever there's that little preface, that's something coming very important you need to pay attention to. And he says, I assure you that if you don't turn your lives around and become like this little child, you will definitely not enter the kingdom of heaven. So I wonder what he means by that. What did Jesus mean, become like a little child? It certainly makes us recall the question that Nicodemus asked in the very beginning of the Gospel of John in John 3. Nicodemus was, of course, a well-respected scholar himself, a member of the Sanhedrin. He came to Jesus by night, maybe so he wouldn't be seen. And one of the questions he asked for Jesus to clarify for him was, how is it possible to start over? Can a person who's grown up crawl back up into their mother's womb and be born all over again? Is that possible? And of course it isn't. What is it about childhood or about children that Jesus wants us to emulate or to re-experience? Remember, this is very important that we remember that in the first century, children were not kind of treasured and they loved their children, but they weren't kind of like treasured, idolized, almost romanticized, where some of our children are now. I mean, there were no helicopter parents in the first century. Children were truly the bottom of the rung when it came to the hierarchies of life. So it would have been a huge shock for the disciples to have Jesus say to them, you got to become like one of these little rugrats who's running around under your feet over here that you did not even notice when you were standing here talking to me there in the marketplace. It would have been a shock for the disciples to hear him say, you must become like a little child. What did he mean by that? Well, certainly humility. Like Paul says in Romans, do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Again, as Curtis was saying, we do volunteer with the in from the cold. We do a good job of showing hospitality to whomever comes in our doors or people that we meet outside on the street. And it's sometimes a conscious decision how we show that hospitality in such a way that it's not condescending, in such a way that people feel valued, infinitely valued. So humility should not show. It's easy to show, try to be like more humble than anybody else. That's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? I remember my niece teaches sociology at Ithaca College, and she always takes a group of students down for a field trip to the Dominican Republic right after school's over. I think she's about to leave next week. And the first time she went with them, they were meeting with this very important grassroots advocacy group called Justicia Global, and all the Latin Americans shook all their hands, and the students shook everyone's hand, and then every single student, like on cue, pulled out of their pocket a little thing of hand sanitizer and sanitized their hands. And the Latin Americans were very polite. They didn't say anything. But later, they asked for a written evaluation, and that was the first thing they all wrote down was, how do you think that made us feel? Hello. There's a way of showing hospitality in such a way that you truly value the other person and they feel valued. They feel infinitely valued rather than kind of, oh, I'm now an object of your charity. In humility, count others better than yourself, says Paul to the church at Philippi. And of course, going to the end of this particular gospel we just read today, we know the long and wonderful story of the so-called parable of the Last Judgment, where Jesus reminds his disciples that whatever you do to the least of these who are members of my family, you're doing it to me. Whether you're feeding them or giving them shelter or clothing, visiting them, especially in prison, you're doing that to me. So certainly humility what might be one thing Jesus is talking about. But I think there's something even more important, because children, especially in the first century, did not have a lot of choice about being humble. That's just who they were. It's not like they could go, oh, I think I'll get up and be humble today. They were humble. So it's something that, it's got to be more to it than that in my mind. To become like children, it's not about regaining lost innocence either. And every one of us who's been around any children know that they're not always completely innocent. And you can't crawl back into the womb or unlearn lessons that we've learned as adults. You can't unsee some things that we adults have seen, or even as teenagers, you can't unexperience some things that we've experienced. But I think one of the main things that Jesus may have been talking about when he was recommending that we all become like children is that we become teachable again, that we reawaken wonder, that we especially cultivate our curiosity. That's something we should do every morning to be good followers of Jesus. He was always so curious. He really wanted to know what was going on with people in such a deep way. I go to the Y almost every day, and up there at the Troy Y, there's now a sign as you come in. It says, the globe is 71% water. Your children are 100% curious. Teach your kid to swim. Your children are 100% curious. How many adults do you know of who you can say that about? I think that would be a great compliment to an adult, to say to that person, you're so curious, in a good way, not in a prying way. What keeps us from being curious sometimes? What blunts our curiosity? Well, I'm just guessing. I think that sometimes we think we already know, whatever it is. We think we can size people up. We know what you're wearing. We know kind of how you get around town, whether it's in a Lexus or you took the bus, and we know where you live. We know what education you had. We know whatever. We think we know. We think we know what people are already like. That's just wrong. Isn't that just wrong? Don't we need to stop and say, maybe we don't? One of the things that Lillian Daniel says in this first chapter of the book we're reading together, and I'm really impressed about how many folks are joining in on the book studies. It's over a third of our worshiping congregation are reading this book, which is really good. And the very first chapter is about hospitality. And she talks about how the church needs to aspire to a deeper welcome. You get welcomed everywhere, right? You get welcomed in your whatever groups you work at work, or whatever community groups you are in. You walk into Walmart, you got somebody who's personally paid there to be welcoming you. Okay, fine. And that's all good. But the church aspires to a deeper welcome. A welcome that's not just content to say, okay, I already know who you are. No, you don't. We need to open our eyes and observe. Even people you think you know really, really well, that you've known them for many, many years. We need to practice a welcoming and a curiosity of whatever people are going through, because we're all always changing a little bit, aren't we? We're continuing to evolve, I hope so. And we need to be curious about each other's continuing development and about, what's going on with each other. And we can ask in helpful ways and find ways to be real with each other. So to become like a child is certainly to be humble. It's certainly but most of all, to be teachable, to be curious, to reawaken wonder. And I even think that hospitality of the heart thinks that it's more important to be in relationship than it is to be right. And those two things go into conflict sometimes. Sometimes I think we cut off relationships because we're afraid that our core beliefs will be challenged. I want to show you a little clip from the Gandhi movie. This is, 20 years ago, maybe more. And I'll give you a little background before, if you hadn't seen the movie in a while, but I really recommend you see the whole thing. The all the strikes and the civil disobedience has already gone on that Gandhi led, and England has already pretty much let go, backed off. India has its independence, and now they're facing a terrible challenge of the relationship between the Muslims and the Hindus in northern India. And my aunt was a missionary in India for 43 years from the United Methodist Church, and she was there during this. She's passed away years ago, but I remember her telling about partition and how hard it was up in the Punjab. Many people got killed. There was a mass migration, speaking of wandering, of people, Muslims going toward Bangladesh or toward Pakistan, both being created at that time, and Hindus leaving both those places. So that's the background for this little clip, and the reason I'm showing it is because I think it shows how Gandhi was modeling a deeper welcome of a peacemaker, of saying there are ways that we can get beyond labels, there are ways that we can show a hospitality of the heart that goes even deeper than what we think were our core beliefs. It's kind of intense, this scene, and it has some language in it that I'm kind of glad our little baptismal family has already left, because it's kind of scary. But I hope it makes the point about being more important to be in relationship than to be right.
It's all promise.
Oh, I'm sorry, he's done.
We stop. Hindu swords. It's a promise. Go. God be with you. Here, eat! Eat! I'm going to hell, but not with your death on my soul. Only God decides who goes to hell. I killed a child. I smashed his head against a wall. Why? They killed my son. My boy. The Muslims killed my son. I know a way out of hell. Find a child whose mother and father have been killed. A little boy or boy, listen high and raise him as your own. Only be sure that he is a Muslim and that you raise him as one.
That gives you a little thing to think about. Did you hear all the words? He's speaking very low because he's on I forgot to mention he's on a hunger strike and he's been very weak. So he says, I know a way out of hell. Whether or not you believe in traditional forms of hell, you can see this young man was in hell because he's feeling so guilty and so bereft of his own son that he did some retribution, an eye for an eye, and took another life of another little child. And Gandhi says, I know a way out of hell. Find a little child who has lost its mother and father and raise him as your own. And make sure it's a Muslim child and raise him as a Muslim. Can you imagine what that must have been like? So contemporary now too, isn't it? What would it be like if you were two warring groups of people religiously across religious lines to open your heart to a little child and not try to indoctrinate that little person into your beliefs, but to get to know their culture's background so well that you could raise that little child in the faith that they had lost because they lost their parents. Is that not an amazing example of that deeper welcome that I think we all aspire to, that Jesus wants us to exhibit, not only here at Christ Church, but wherever we are, in our politics, in our family life, just to let go of whatever, sometimes we may be called upon to let go of whatever we think is rock solid understandings that we've lived with for years, and become curious about what somebody else thinks and what somebody else holds dear. Lillian Daniel writes, "It is God's character to be hospitable and welcoming, and therefore the church needs to be too." May it be so. Amen. And now we're going to sing a new song. It's not hard. It has a lot of scales in it. It's called House of God. If you're a music reader, you want to look at the music, it's in the little green book, number 3132. I think it sums up Jesus' words to us very, very simply. We're going to have John play it all the way through, and then we'll sing.
This is the household of the heart. May God's peace travel through our gaze, our handshake, our fist bump, or elbow bump, or hug, whatever it is that for you will communicate God's peace to others. If you want to stay in your seats, you may, or if you may travel around the room, you may. The peace of Christ be with each of us.
Okay. May. Nate. Okay, Nate and Rio. Okay. Good morning. It's one of those mornings this morning. I'd like for everybody to, I have a good friend named Shirley. Some of you know who Shirley is. And her thing is, let's take a deep breath. Just bring it in, hold it, and let it out. Let's do one more. And let it out. It's one of these days where we're surrounded by blessings, and sometimes we get so caught up in what's going on that we sometimes miss them. Blessings like a granddaughter, June, who was born to Nate and Rio, so we're very happy to hear about the arrival of June. And then also, it was brought in as a prayer that Ruth would like for her son, Mark, to be remembered. He was in an accident, and her daughter, Rebecca, also had a baby. And also to remember Ruth, who is now a grandmother for the first time, and also caring for someone who's been in an accident. So if we could keep that in our thoughts and prayers. And then also, in 1949, Congress recognized that there was Memorial Day, which was founded after the Civil War to bring union for both the Union and the Confederacy, to bring people together to remember the dead. And then they started doing individual celebrations recognizing the Marines, the Army, the Air Force. And somebody decided in 1949, we should recognize everyone who serves in the armed forces. And so yesterday was the third Saturday in May, and it was the day that was set aside to remember the people who are actively serving and who have served in the past. And so as we go to prayer of the day, I would like to ask that you remember those who have served, those who are actively serving, those who have stayed at home, who have sons, daughters, fathers, brothers, cousins, relatives, and friends that have served. And also to remember those who have ultimately paid the ultimate price as we move into Memorial Day, to remember those who have passed. And so I will also ask you to please pay very close attention to the names in the bulletin. And if you would, just take a moment to read through the names over the course of the next week. Just lift up a silent prayer, put them on your heart and on your mind. And now I'll ask you to join me in prayer. Creator God, great is your name and worthy are you to be praised. Today, united as a body of faith, we seek to find your face and strive for understanding in our daily lives. We seek purity of heart to respond to those who come into our journey, the least, the last, the lost, the loved and the unloved. We seek purity of sight to see those who the world has grown blind to, the oppressed, the lonely, and the forgotten. We seek your hearing so that we may hear the needs of those near to us and those many continents away. Today we ask you to reveal and to help each of us to rid ourselves of our biases, our prejudices, our fears that drive us away from delivering the mercy that you have entrusted within each of us. As Thomas Merton said, at the center of our being is the point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is never at our disposal. And from which God disposes of our lives, which is inaccessible to the fantasies of our own mind or the brutalities of our own will. This little point of nothingness and of absolute poverty, it is the pure joy and glory of God in us. It is, so to speak, his name written within us as our poverty, as our indulgence, as our dependence, as our sonship. It's like a pure diamond blazing with the invisible light of heaven. Today, we ask you to bring us into that light and help us to reflect your light and your love. And we ask that you hear us as we pray the prayer that Jesus the Christ taught his disciples to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. All right, now as the ushers bring forward the offering plates, we're going to ask that you join us in song. You can remain seated. It's the song Sanctuary, and it's in the little black hymnal, The Faith We Sing, and it's on page 2164 if you want to follow the music, and if you don't want to mess with the music, it's on the screens. Creator God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the many gifts that you've given us. We thank you for this opportunity to be able to give back a portion of that which you have given us. Please guide the stewards of these gifts, that they may use them as you desire, so that they may fully honor and glorify yours, the most holy of names. Amen. And now, if you'll stand, we're going to be singing They'll Know We Are Christians, which is also in that little black hymnal, The Faith We Sing. It's also on the screens, and it will be on page 2223.
One day be restored, and they'll know
Go forth in peace and in that love to share God's love and peace with everyone you meet, especially people who you just see as you go out the door today. Maybe you'll see someone you've never met before or don't know well. And you can say your name to that person and really get to know them. And may God's blessing, creating and redeeming and sustaining every moment be upon us and remain with us, both now and forevermore. Amen.